Welcome to another episode of Football Asides. I'm your host, Glo, and today I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Wes. Wes, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Glo.
How's it going? How's quarantine? I don't
Quar-
know. I don't even know what week it is anymore.
that is an excellent question. I think we're approaching the third month of quarantine. Still going just as crazy. Asking myself what is going on at least 50 times a day. So,
Any good
yeah.
answers? Do you have any wisdom to share? Just like what is going
No.
on actually?
Since, I don't know, in the last couple of weeks, those reps have definitely gone up with all that's going on. But still no answers. But I think we're close to getting there.
Yeah, the other day, like we both live in DC and they've opened up somewhat, and one of the most shocking things I saw were people eating outside at a restaurant.
Yeah.
And I was just like, "What are you here? Why are you here?" Just like so weird.
Yeah, it's so strange, and it was even weirder. I remember marching and seeing people eating brunch and then watching a group of peaceful protesters
It's
walk
just,
by. That juxtaposition is just too funny.
it's just like we're like there were like two different worlds going on simultaneously, and I just
For sure.
like this is why we're in a simulation for sure, and just consistently think that.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's going to start breaking soon in a good way.
Yeah, I feel like
Change is
do you know
coming.
that it's like that episode of Black Mirror, and I think it's Hank the DJ, and then like
Oh,
when
oh
they like said they're
yeah.
young, yeah. I feel like
When
this
they
is where we're
escape.
at. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I feel that. But no, yeah, the restaurants opening in DC has been weird. I also just, I've never been less uncertain about what my next 3 days looks like.
Yeah.
So I'm still just in that mode of like, I can't even think ahead right now. I'm
I
so
just
in the
like
moment.
yeah, when people ask me like how are you doing, I'm just like, well, today in this particular hour or overall because I don't know.
What does that mean? How are you doing even mean?
Yeah, we're living in an absurd world today, which is actually the topic of our podcast today. And
Yes.
today we're talking about racism in sports and soccer specifically, but it is everywhere. And unless you've been living under a rock in the last like 2 weeks, you all will be aware of the tragic murder of George Floyd on May 25th by the
Hmm.
Minneapolis policeman who knelt on his knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds
On
while a man
camera.
was crying out for his life on camera. And this video has sparked so much outrage, and people have taken to the streets. It feels like people have had enough. And it's
Yeah.
important to note that this is not the first of its kind. That
No, sadly.
Yeah, George Floyd is indeed one in the long list that goes back hundreds of years in America, or from of black men and women who have died from police brutality and police violence. And amongst this most recent cases, we have Breonna Taylor as well. And of
Hmm.
course, these are the ones that have been videotaped. You can imagine that there's many of them that have not met the internet.
Yeah. I was actually on Twitter today and I saw the original police report that was filed by the Minneapolis police. There was no mention of, the kneeing on the neck. There was, they excused it as George Floyd was resisting arrest. And it's just crazy to me how important cell phone footage is in all of these circumstances and how even with that, there's still people pushing back. Like we all saw George Floyd get murdered on camera. We all saw Philando Castile. It's the same thing over and over.
It is absolutely insane to see that, because
Mm,
you would think, if you had committed a crime, if that was you committing a crime, a jury wouldn't be like, but from this angle, this person might be doing
no,
this. You know what I
yeah,
mean? That's
yeah,
like that video, all the videos that have come out and all the testimonies that have come out are always enough to convict you in a court of law. But
yeah,
somehow, I think like the narrative and the disconnect between like the police and the people they're supposed to protect is absolutely overwhelming. And a lot of the population can be seen to be making excuses for them.
yeah. It's just it's so wild to me how there's people are coming to realize that you know a lot of people fundamentally don't trust the police. Like there's people that walk by officers and feel a sense of comfort and a sense of protection. Whereas, me and you, I'm assuming you feel the same way. Tell me if I'm wrong. People of color walking by police officers, there's just this sudden tense tension that like creeps through my body. And we have to fix that. And I think this moment hopefully can spark us to seeing all the systemic failures and flaws within policing in America.
Absolutely. I think what this moment has done more than anything is really open the eyes to, like you said, the population in America who are mostly white, who do not have that relationship with the police, that at times when people of color do mention that that's their relationship with the police, it sounds like it really can feel like you're getting gaslit. Just
Yeah.
like, but I did this.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I have yet to meet a white person who has had the talk or who even knows what the talk, like a lot of people do, and especially now, but who've had a conversation with their parents of how to interact with law enforcement.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. I remember my dad the first time when I started driving. He taught me the whole thing of keep your hands on the wheel, answer only in yes no. It's wild that we have to be taught a different way, and we have to. There's just this extra burden on us, and I don't know. I am still hopeful though. I will say that. It seems like people are finally waking up.
Yeah, I do agree. It is. I
It took a
think
pandemic.
it did take a pandemic. Is that why you think this? I mean, like I mentioned, this is not the first of these videos. We saw Tamir Ice like being murdered
Yeah.
on video, a 12-year-old
Yeah.
year old boy.
Hmm.
Why do you think this one is different?
That's a
If it
great
is.
question. I think it is different. I think there's a few things going on. And again, this is mostly just my theories and my thoughts that are going through my head. I'll try to back it up with facts when I can. But for one, over everything, this is an election year. And I think, we've had one of the most volatile presidents in probably modern history, maybe of all time. And he has been handling this in the worst possible way, along with other things, along with the pandemic. And I think because of that, people are starting to become hypersensitive and hyper aware of a lot of the issues that could potentially shift and could, be a factor for change come November. And so I think that plays a role, the fact that it's election year. And I also think too, we're a part of a generation that, 8 years ago or whenever Trayvon Martin was killed, nothing happened. Nothing happened. George Zimmerman
Truly, that
got
was
away.
freshman year of college
Yeah,
for us. I definitely
yeah,
remember that was my first big protest that I
yeah,
attended. And
yeah,
then it
and
also just as quickly went away,
yeah,
at least in
and
the part of the world that I was living in.
oh, for sure. And we just forgot about it. And then, Eric Gardner, I Can't Breathe, that happens. And nothing happens. And Philando Castile, nothing happens. And I think a lot of this too is something's got to give. Our generation is, more diverse, generally more tolerant, generally more progressive on these issues and more adamant about change. And I think you're seeing that push. And speaking of sports, you notice that a lot of these younger players are the ones that are being outspoken. People
Yeah.
like Raheem Sterling in soccer, and people like and Eric Reed in football, or Derrick Rose in basketball, all whom started these conversations in their sports.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would agree that the hope. I want to add before that one of the other compounding factors I think is that the epidemic has laid
Yes,
bare the inequalities in society. The
for
fact that
sure.
in America, people of color, and especially black people, are twice as likely to die
Yeah.
from the coronavirus, even accounting for class
Hmm.
and wealth and all these things. And it's just it's just I think it's late, and also the level of unemployment, people losing their jobs,
Yeah.
and lastly, not having what I would call the usual distractions that change the news cycle. The fact
Hmm.
that this is what's happening and everybody being cooped up in their house is really forcing them to like reckon with what society is or what society they live in.
Yeah, and everybody's glued to a screen. You couldn't have missed this news. I don't, unless you were out partying in the Ozarks of Missouri, or you live under a rock.
If people are
Everybody's
David
seeing this.
Thoreau in the woods, like out here, maybe.
Yeah. but yeah, I think all of those points are exactly right. The pandemic has showed, amongst other things, not even the disparity, like beyond the disparity among color lines, just a lot of these systems we have in place in this country are just deeply flawed, and they were exposed.
Yeah, I think it's really bringing to bear, at least for the protesters in the United States and all the like solidarity protests that are going on across the world, like
Hmm.
really are calling not just for these officers to be held accountable, but to
Yeah.
deeply rethink the way we rethink public safety and
Hmm.
consider like investing in communities. And I mean, at least I'm not sure, like, if all our listeners know, but like the history of the police force in the United States started as
Hmm.
slave patrols. So,
Yeah.
like, it is an inherent, like, it's an institution that at its core was
Yeah.
meant to be racist, literally the
Exactly.
foundation. And it hasn't
Ex-
really gotten better. It's just been consistently rebranded and slightly tweaked when you look at it, like, the way the laws are enforced. Like, stop and
yeah.
frisk in New York, absolutely, like, 8 times more
Hmm.
likely black people are 8 times more likely to be stopped and frisked than white people.
Yeah, and by the way, our president right now advocated for stop and frisk during the debates in 2016. So,
Yeah, De
not
Blasio did not do a great job of just it's yeah, the whole thing is absurd. But the point is, like, this is happening to everyday Americans, and people might say this is a one-off case, this, that, the other. And if you say that, I just don't know where you've been living. Just do
you're
some
not
reading.
reading. You're
You're
not
not
paying
reading.
attention.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not reading. But I think we also want to talk about it from the perspective of sports, as we are a sports podcast.
Yes.
But the key, it's not new, I think, is what people are realizing. Just
Yeah.
in the last 1 to 2 years, the level of like racist abuse that's happened to like athletes of color in football is absolutely astonishing. You have like Koulibaly, you have like
Hmm.
Iñaki Williams, you have, I mean, Lukaku, which is even like a more unique case wherein he was racially abused by the opposing fans, and then the ultras, the Inter ultras, wrote him a letter that I wish. Let me pull up this code because the
Yeah.
Italy is the ultras. They are called the Curva Nord, and they said this, and I quote: "We're really sorry you thought that what happened in Cagliari was racist. We understand that Italy is not like many other North European countries where racism is a real problem." I was like,
Oh my gosh. That
these
is
are people who
horrible.
theoretically are supposed to be on your part, and this is
Yeah.
it's crazy. And you have, I mean, like Moise Khan, who was described oh, that's truly crazy, who was described as having provoked the racial abuse to him by his teammate. And he later obviously said that he was misinterpreted, but like I think that just shows you to the level within which like implicit biases and racism is just in our society, off the on and off the pitch.
Yeah. So the Moise Kane, he was accused of provoking people to being racist towards him.
So the way that Moise can unfurled, like the situation unfurled, is like this was a game, he scored a goal, and then after like he had been berated and racially abused like throughout the entire game, and then he went to celebrate, like he celebrated in the corner at the opposition's fan, to which they started like making monkey chats and like racist
Oh my
comments
gosh.
at him. Again, I want to remind you that he is a sick, like an 18, he was
Yeah.
18 or 19. He's like my brother's age, you know.
He
Not
could
that
be my
age
dad's
should be a
age.
factor, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That is wild. Oh
And
my
then
gosh.
yeah, and that's crazy because like his teammate, who again you'd think should have his back,
Hmm.
Bonucci, he said it is 50-50, like the blame was 50-50.
Oh my gosh. Get that out of my face. A lot of those defenses feel like the same way that people defend, and I know this is a touchy subject, but like sexual assault, like she was asking for it, the way they were
Exactly.
dressed.
No, it really is. That's the best
Yeah,
parallel for it.
it's just it's insane. And speaking along those lines, this whole thing almost feels tangential to the Me Too movement in a little way, where it's mass groups of people taking these matters into their own hands when they're clearly saying that nothing is changing, and really forcing the hands of these institutions to change.
And that's really true. And speaking of forcing the hands of institutions, I think I would I think I've been impressed by how empowered a lot of athletes and athletes of color and their
Hmm.
allies who are in positions where they have been able to leverage the power of their positions, the visibility, social media. I mean, in soccer, UEFA. So we had like Jadon Sancho and Marco Thuram and others like really during the games last week reveal a message that was justice for George Floyd or like Black Lives
Hmm.
Matter.
Hmm.
And we had FIFA basically, I mean, Jadon Sancho got a yellow, not for the message, but for taking off his shirt. But FIFA basically
Hmm.
encouraged referees to use their common sense in instances like this. And
Hmm.
it is still FIFA, and this is perhaps the hardest stance they've taken on literally anything.
Yeah, corruption, not them.
Yeah, but not that deep. But again, I'm. I mean, I don't really know how well meaning those intentions were, but at least something is being done, you know?
Yeah, at least their hands are being forced.
And you have the same thing with the NFL, right?
Yeah, so NFL has been interesting, and I get worked up about this issue because I think everybody should, because this is the most peaceful form of protest being alienated by people on all sides, and I just think it's just mind blowing to me that Colin Kaepernick in, I want to say, 2016 or 17 season takes a knee during the national anthem. A knee. People scream drunken nonsense during the national anthem. He takes a knee, arguably more respectful than most people there, and he gets asked about it after the game, and he says it's in response to police brutality. I am protesting the systemic oppression of black people in this country. To which he is later blackballed by the entire NFL, creates an uproar, and just exposes, again, speaking of exposing systems, like exposes the base of the NFL, which is, a lot of, predominantly white, predominantly not very educated, and predominantly kind of, not predominantly, but, a good amount of that base is pretty racially insensitive. And I think, it, it's at a point now that because of this whole George Floyd and because of this whole awakening that's happened, that the NFL is finally coming around to it. But I'm still very frustrated with the NFL as an organization, that it took this much coercion. It took 3 years of fighting and peaceful protest and criticism for them to finally just say the words Black Lives Matter, and they still haven't directly addressed Colin Kaepernick in a fair way. Drew Brees famously recently, during an interview. This is again like that. What's scary is his thinking is how a lot of NFL fans and front offices feel. They just feel that there's this disrespect to the flag when you take a knee during the anthem, and you're acting like these black players don't have fathers and grandfathers who fought in the same wars
Yeah,
and then
like I have
came
a lot of
back to
people in my
segregation.
family who are in the
Yeah,
military, and I just can't think of anything more
yeah,
respectful than taking a knee to
yeah,
protest. And also, the point of a lot of like veterans fighting is so you can have a right to
yes.
do something like that.
Exactly, exactly. And for Drew Brees to come out with a comment like that, I think honestly struck a nerve, and I think that might have been the deciding moment that his he apologized like 3 times. His third apology might have been the time where the NFL was finally like, okay, we got to recognize this issue,
Yeah.
and he ended up taking it to Trump, even because Trump, of course, tweeted about it saying, "You got to stand during the national anthem, show some respect." Um,
Yeah. I think it is very much important. I think the flag argument, as I like to call it, is often enough used to, like, it's a fog that prevents us from having the conversation of why are these people protesting.
yeah,
And I mean, fundamentally, the flag means different things to different people.
yeah,
If you're a man like Drew Brees, and if you, there's a chance that when you look at the flag, you see a country that has generally all things like accounted for, looked at you favorably, you know,
Mm-hmm.
valued your life, valued your contribution.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a person of color in this country, the flag means drastically different things. Like
Mm-hmm.
people have families where that flag was flying during before the Civil War, you know? Like
Yeah.
it means different things to different people, and everybody's entitled to protest however they want, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like Glow, if me and you, two black people, if we drove to rural Virginia right now and we saw a big American flag outside of a gas station, I would be a little nervous. Like it wouldn't be a sign of comfort for me. It'd
I
be a sign
agree.
of
It's very actually like the
It-
very very like aggressive flags like when you're
yeah.
driving down, I they don't inspire a sense of comfort to me, even though
Yeah.
like I have nothing against the flag. I just don't have the same relationship to it that a fair amount of Americans do, and I respect their relationship to it, and I
Yeah.
think it's reasonable to expect. Also, the Kaepernick thing, I want to note that he was like the first time he was sitting, but it was actually for an advice from a Green Beret who told him that it would be more respectful to kneel as a form of protest. So it came from a veteran, which is
Yeah. It's just again like it's people just not wanting to have the conversation and not wanting to think about why he's doing it. They just have their own personal ideas that they're projecting onto why he's doing it. And for 3 years, the NFL and its fans, a lot of its fans and owners, were projecting onto it, you know, that this is wrong. This is my understanding of the flag, rather than trying to, you know, bridge that divide and figure out why he feels the need to do that in the first place.
exactly. It's like, why is it that this flag that's supposed to like represent hope, prosperity, opportunity, that people feel stifled under, feel like it doesn't represent them? I think that's a conversation we should be having. And to your
Mm-hmm.
point, I think one of the reasons this feels a little bit different is, I mean, the NFL's hand was essentially forced by the video by like all of its athletes. Who I want to mention, the NFL is, I believe, more than 70% black. All
Yes. Yeah.
is it 70%?
Significantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there is currently two black coaches in the NFL. So go figure.
I mean that's the same thing in football, like in soccer, whatever you want to call it, as well. I just
Yeah.
I'm not literally cannot think off the top of my head that's the last time I saw a Premier League coach that was black. And it's like
Yeah.
I think when people say that the system is broken, this is one of the things they're referring to. That it
Yeah.
is absolutely unbelievable that in a league like the NFL where like half of the talent is more than half of the talent is black, there's absolutely so few people in positions of power. And that's when like statements that are absolutely absurd come through because there's no
Yeah.
one, you know, who can speak to it in that boardroom. There are no seats at
Yeah.
the table.
Yeah. The owner of the Houston Texans, when this kneeling was happening in protest, he had a quote where he said he was super disappointed by the kneeling, and he said we cannot have the inmates running the asylum, which
Yeah.
is a crazy quote to begin with. He also misquoted it. It's you can't have the patients running the asylum, and I feel
Yep.
like that distinguishment of comparing NFL players to inmates it speaks volumes to the way that a lot of these owners think about their athletes. You know, they're just property. They you know they do the work. They do a lot of physical labor for 9 years, and then they leave and they're cut free and they're free to go live their life. Well, you just reaped a ton of profit off their backs. It's you know now I'm getting into an argument about capitalism, but it's like
Yeah, I think we might today. We'll have to have you back for the capitalism conversation.
yes,
But
yeah,
like,
the revolution and all of that. That's part two of this.
yeah, do you know what that makes me think of? Like, is a while back, I think like 2011 or something, is the Hank Willis Thomas, the Cotton Ball. Like that quote is what it vividly makes me
Yeah.
think of. Like that's
Yeah,
for a lot of
it's
people of color in America, that's what it looks like, and especially in sports where I mean, it's just like you're a body
Mhm.
and you're supposed to. Do you remember I forget who the journalist that told LeBron to shut up and dribble.
Shut up, dribble. Laura Ingraham. I cannot believe she still has a job.
Yeah.
There's a great video on Twitter that somebody spliced together. It was her talking about LeBron James and Kevin Durant speaking out, and then it was her talking about Drew Brees speaking out. Her response to LeBron James and Kevin Durant was "quote unquote" shut up and dribble when they were speaking about their political beliefs and being critical of Trump. And then when Drew Brees came out and spoke how taking a knee during the national anthem is disrespecting the flag, she came to his defense and said, he's allowed to have an opinion. Why shouldn't he be able to speak up? So
Yeah. That's
again,
brilliant. Like, truly, like, I think, the media is, of course, a huge problem with it. And again,
yeah,
I don't mean to say that all of the media is, but like the media is, and in soccer specifically, I would say a lot of like the footballing media is absolutely, like, the racist undertones are absolutely baffling to me.
yeah,
I mean, as a person of color, I'm like obviously more attuned to it, and I'm always looking out for it. But like, so I have like a couple of examples that like have absolutely, you don't need to be black to notice that there's something absolutely problematic about this. I mean, so back to our favorite Lukaku, it's an Italian newspaper who said that the way to stop him was to feed him bananas, and I'm
oh
just
my
like,
gosh,
great, like,
they
'cause
they printed that.
yeah, but you know what? It's better. There was there was in the promotion of a game, Corriere del Sport used Black Friday. I think it was Lukaku against Valencia. No, it wasn't Antonio Valencia. I forget. I really will come back to me. And they used Black Friday as the promo for the game. And one of the more fucked up things is when Serie A's effort to stand against racism, they commissioned paintings of monkeys as part of the
Jesus,
anti-discrimination campaign. Which
what the fuck?
literally, you're like, what? It's just
Like,
literally absolutely baffling.
when you see, like, when we talk about systemic racism, like, that is a newspaper, that is one person writing that is an editor on top of them saying, yeah, let's go with that, and then that's another editor saying, you know what, let's do it, let's send it, let's put it on the front page of our headline. I just can't believe this was, like, I'm assuming, like, recently too, right?
Yeah, no, this was a pretty recent, and I mean, the campaign went down because there's an uproar about it, but the fact that it made it that far, like you said, that there were series of review about it, and like, racism isn't always like overt people like making monkey chants at you, or just like racially
Yeah.
insensitive sayings at you. It's in the way black people and people of color are described. Like, I would want to point to, like, Raheem Sterling, I would say, has been like by far like on the receiving end of it more than most people. And in
Yeah.
2018, he like showed how the Daily Mail had described the tone they used to describe a black player buying a mother for a house as an act of frivolous spending. Is like, we can't believe it, like, he hasn't even started yet and he spent this much money. But then comparably, when he was a white player, it was quite flattering, or just like, lovely player buys a house for his mother. Do you know what I mean? It's just like
Yeah.
and outside of sports, like the coverage of John Boyega's speech versus
Yeah.
Seth Rogen's like shutting down people on his Instagram, very drastically different.
So different. Yeah. It never ceases to blow my mind, and that's why, that's why I'm starting to become more hopeful. Is, things are getting caught on camera, and we're paying attention to when people flip flop as blatantly as Laura Ingraham. And I hope I'm not as privy to the situation. I've seen videos of the protests in Europe, and I'm assuming soccer players have been involved. I think Raheem Sterling's spoken out about it a couple times. But have you been inspired from what you've been seeing in terms of the soccer players, or keeps on saying soccer, football players abroad?
I think you can say soccer. It's technically association
Cool.
soccer, so soccer is by far also an apt
Cool,
term,
cool,
and no
cool,
one really
cool.
cares. I think I wouldn't say I'm hopeful that a lot of the people who are speaking out are indeed young. That it seems that there's a large cohort of young players that are indeed speaking out. And I would say, like, even from a team perspective, from the games that I've been watching in the Bundesliga, which is the only team that's the only league that's okay, not the only league, but like the only top tier league that's has
It's playing
matches.
games.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of teams that have taken a knee, and there's armbands and stuff like that. And I think while those are symbolic gestures, and they can also, if that's all that happens, it is indeed performative activism. I still think it's little progress in
Hmm.
contrast to when Luis Suarez called Patrice Evra the N word, and the entire team, after he received
Jeez.
his, I think, 8 match ban, the entire team came out with t shirts in support of him.
Of Luis Suarez?
Yeah. So I think at least we're progressing in some way.
Oh my
At least we're
gosh.
not wearing t-shirts
Yeah.
to support people who racially abuse others.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit progress to be made there. That makes me a little bit hopeful, but I think a lot of it will have to be where is the follow through, you know?
Yeah. What is the change that we can see? What is the action? You know? And I think we're waiting for that now. You know, both in terms of politics and both in terms of the NFL. Like, sorry, in all of sports. But speaking of the NFL, are they gonna let Colin Kaepernick into the league? Are they gonna let their players kneel? Are they gonna kick out people who chant racist things? Um,
Exactly.
kind of an aside. The are you familiar with the Malice at the Palace, which was what happened in the NBA in like the early 2000s?
I is this the player lockout? The NBA lockout?
Uh, no. So this
Okay.
was during a
Educate me.
game. I got you. I'd encourage all the listeners to Google it. But what happened was the Pistons were playing the Indiana Pacers in Detroit, and a fan threw a water bottle at Ron Artest and started talking shit to him. And this has happened throughout sports and up until then, and there's never been like a major reckoning moment. Um, but fan throws water bottle. Ron Artest. Ron Artest is a very large professional athlete, and naturally he gets upset and he goes into the crowd and beats the shit out of the guy that threw the water bottle. And then other fans start piling in on him, and the next thing you know, it is benches clearing brawl between fans and players all over the place. There's no security to be seen, and it's just everywhere you look, some NBA player is just beating up some fan that has been talking trash to them the whole game. And obviously there was major suspensions after that, ton of drama, but part of me just wants to bring that back. Part of me just wants to have, if you are a racist, I want the biggest player on the field to just kick your ass. I think they should be allowed to do that. And it's so strange to me how these people can go to a game and just feel like they're entitled to, like, it's an excuse to just be a racist asshole when there's never an excuse to do that
I
unless
think
you're unless you're an actor playing some character in Django.
yeah, I am definitely more of a pacifist than you are, but I do also I do think that something has to be done about fan abuse. I think there's a
Yeah.
very fine line of like talking shit to like opposing team and trying to get into their head, but then there's
Hmm.
also a line that is crossed when it becomes like racial, and it
Yes.
becomes like very much about the not it becomes nothing about the way they're performing their job.
Hmm.
It's not because, I don't know, they're not completing any passes, they're missing anything. You're purely doing it because of what they look like, because of the skin of their color. And I think something needs to be done about it. And I mean, I'm not sure how well this can be implemented, but what I've been thinking about is we do often forget that professional athletes are like, that's their job.
Yeah.
That's like their version of their 9 to 5. And if I can't come into your job, if you're in a role of customer service, and yell, like hurl like racial insults at you without getting in trouble, I don't understand why like the football field should be treated differently.
Totally agree.
Yeah, so I was thinking, like what if like one of like again, I'm always brainstorming on how to make
Mm,
this better, but each time you buy a ticket, you should sign a contract, it should be part of your ticket is a contract that if you're caught violating this like moral code, this like you're abusing like players on basis of this, that, and the other, you should like immediately like that breach of contract mean you can't come to that stadium ever again. I
yeah,
think
I
you've
love
broken
that.
the contract. And I think because people are like, oh, we can find them, we can do this. There's so many cameras. Like the cameraman who find the one person that's yawning in the crowd, pretty sure they can find.
Yes, I'm pretty sure anybody could. And,
Anybody
if you're
could.
a
It's just like
fan and you see that, yeah, you
yeah,
just
the
be like,
feed.
hey,
Like if you just looked
yeah,
at the feed, you would know. And
yeah,
then like I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's gonna make it through enforcement. No, you if you make it contract based, once you break the contract, they are consequences. And I think every single time you go to a game, it should be a renewed contract between you and the players. And like from a soccer perspective, I always think that perhaps I mean, we all know that like institutions care about money. At the
hmm,
end of the day, it's about the bottom line more than anything.
yeah,
And
it's a product.
yeah, and if you make it so that one of the consequences is getting points deducted and points mean money, I think there'll be a lot more
Ooh,
efficiency,
I like that.
a lot more
If
efficiency in people finding like
if
abuses like that. If you
yeah,
knew that
if it happens
if
at
you
your
don't prevent
stadium,
exactly, and also if you are a fan, and you do that and you are aware that you doing that and getting caught means your team could get relegated and thus like miss out on $100 million, I bet you will think twice about it.
yes, for sure. All of those soccer hooligans would definitely think twice about it. I love that policy. I 100% think they're at the end of the day, it just comes down a lot to accountability, and taking ownership of the worst part of whatever organization you're part of. For the NFL, they should have addressed their base that was wildly upset about a simple gesture of taking a knee. And instead, they just kind of didn't talk about it and condemned it even. So
It
yeah,
really
and,
is
and, and
that conversations like
mhm,
institutions need to have conversations with the people they're around. People need to have conversations, A, with themselves, B, with their families. Like, just like pretending it doesn't exist isn't really doing much for anyone. And that's what's also been encouraging about this entire situation. I have people who are content to just be non racist actually examining how to be part of the solution, how to be anti
yeah,
racist, how to make it better.
yeah. Yeah, it's been really encouraging to see the people that want to read more and want to learn more about what their role is in solving this bigger issue and this elephant that's been in the room for you know hundreds of years.
Yeah, but just I've had more conversations about white privilege than I've ever had
Oh
in my
yeah,
entire life, and I
I'm
couldn't
getting
be
drained.
more grateful.
Oh yeah, I said I'm getting drained. Ready to say
I
no.
mean,
I
it's
am super
definitely
grateful.
emotionally draining. I would say I feel
Yeah.
like I need a shot after every one of them, and just like bring in my 2 o'clock and just
Yeah, but yeah, it's like people you never would have thought reaching out and being like, "Hey, I want to check in on you, and I want to make sure that I can help." So it's really awesome in
Yeah, I
that
guess
respect.
how have you been? I think explaining because one of the arguments or like one of the things people toss about when you talk about like privilege and especially white privilege is there are poor people who are white as well. There are like people who are
Hmm.
suffering who are white as well. I guess how have you been navigating that if it's come up or if it ever does come up?
So that's always interesting, and to me, I think for some people, race is just such a touchy topic, and it is hard to explain white privilege to someone who, is white but doesn't come from a whole lot, and you're trying to explain to them that they're somehow privileged. But the way I've been approaching it, and a lot of this is just based on conversations and tweets or things I've seen on social media. Um, is just trying to engage with more empathy and not talk down to these people, to people that are, asking these questions and trying to figure out, and just being as genuine as possible when you're answering it. And I think the problem is when people approach these conversations with the most radical idea, and without really explaining it, and just expecting people to be on board. Because when you say something like defund the police, people are going to be off put by that. And so I think it's just all in terms of how you engage that conversation in a way where you are truly trying to educate that person, and you're not engaging it with anger or bitterness towards them for asking a question.
Yeah,
That was kind of a lot. That was theoretical, but yeah.
yeah, that's a definitely, I think that's very valuable. I think that's a good guiding principle in like, I mean, you probably should have this principle in most of your conversation, but in
Yeah.
especially this one, I
Yeah.
think the internet, like, obviously has a ton of awesome resources of, because I think it's very hard, especially for people of color, to try and explain something they intrinsically just feel and have like experienced their entire
Mm-hmm.
life, and put it into words. And because to me and to a lot of black people, it's like pretty obvious. But like when you like,
Yeah.
I saw this
Yeah.
awesome like video that I like truly could explain privilege to like a child, and I was like, this is what we need.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the premise was, right, like the coach was like, okay, I have $100, I'm going to stand on this line and we're going to race towards this $100, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then had like all the students in a line, and she said, but before we do that, I'm going to make a statement, and if this statement applies to you, please take 2 steps forward. And it's just like, take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up in a house with 2 parents. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had an encounter with the police, if you've never had the talk, and all these things. And then at the end of it, he's like, this is where the race starts. And like the fact
Mm-hmm.
that you're here like really has nothing to do with what you have done, but a lot of the reasons where you're starting where you are predominantly afforded to you because the system has valued the color of your skin more.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's kind of, so I thought it was like really important to say, like, when people say privilege, they all that they want equity, they mean people of color and people, because of the history of the United States, where they're just starting at completely different places.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a 450-year advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just saying that, and it's very hard when you have like a 450-year advantage to like build society and build community, to ask the other half to be like, but you can meet us here, right?
That's so true. Yeah. That video is awesome too, by the way. I saw that the other day. It's very powerful and a great explanation of, how privilege works.
Yeah, I thought it was like quite awesome,
Hmm.
generally. But again, I think we're both hopeful, yeah, that
Hmm. I think hopeful is where I'm at right now. Cautiously hopeful.
today, how
Yeah.
in 30 minutes, no one knows.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how I'm feeling, in November. But even again, I hate. I don't want to put this all like Joe Biden is not going to save us from this. This is a thing that is in a great way engaging people in local politics and realizing that these problems are solved on a much granular level. And you being involved in your community to try and fix these issues is super important, and part of this responsibility we have. Like, just voting for president isn't all that's going to fix this. It's seeking out the right people. For example, like Minneapolis has one of the is the spark of this police force, and has tons of corruptions inside of it. It's an entirely democratically run city. It's these police unions just gaining so much power over a population, and just running amok. So anyways,
Yeah.
that's my TED talk on
Just like,
on
thank you.
voting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome kind of talk, Doug. I think
Yeah.
this has been good. Like, I suppose the last of the bits I would like to wrap up with is to bring it back to sports. And what if, I don't know, if I give you a carte blanche, or like, what would you like to see in the future in the world of sports to address the chasm that is the racial inequality and racial abuse.
Wow, this is an
Yeah,
excellent question.
by that I mean, do you want to fix
Fix
racism?
racism. Yeah.
This should be titled Glenn West Fix Racism in Sports.
Yeah. This is an excellent question. So I think the solution is that we need more representation, which is the answer to most things. And kind of like what we were talking about, there's only 2 black coaches in the NFL. We don't see any black coaches in the Premier League, and we don't see any of them in the front offices, I would guess, either.
There are no black owners.
Yeah, and I feel like when that relationship is built on a system where black bodies are just the product and not the ones that are like behind the scenes and in those front office roles, it creates a pretty dangerous relationship. And I think to dismantle that starts with addressing the inequality that exists in a lot of places that are not on the field that still revolve around the world of sports.
Yeah, I think representation is, I agree, it is so key. And I always ask people who are like, but this, but that, but people who can get each other. And like one of the reasons that is so formative, especially for young kids, like the reason they want to be anything is they saw someone do it and they're like, oh, shoot, I would love to do that, you know? And if you grow up in a world where anything you'd want to do, there's no one who looks like you who is doing it, it makes it incredibly hard to visualize yourself doing something like that.
Exactly. That's I joke, because growing up, I grew up in a very white suburb, and half black. Dad's black, mom's white. My latest in the last like 5 years, there's been a ton of mixed athletes that have been in the spotlight. So I like to joke that I am familiar with every mixed athlete because that representation is important, man. If you don't see people like you growing up, you don't know where you really fit in. And to see, people that look like you have success and, live normal lives and live up to these, grand expectations is reassuring. And I think little kids in this next generation has to see that.
Yeah. I think the last thing I've already mentioned what I would like, which is clubs to hold their fan base responsible in addition to like really creating a more diverse work environment. It's no one just inclusion and creating diverse spaces dramatically reduces racism because it's very hard once you've seen and engaged with people as human beings to then go on and see them as threats. And I think a lot of people who live in insular communities really run the risk of like just taking the narrative they're fed,
Yeah, 100%. And that is dangerous.
I guess, and on an individual level, I just want everybody to learn more because I truly believe the greatest privilege, like one of the greatest privileges of allies is they get to learn and not experience racism.
Yeah.
So like that sounds like a pretty decent trade-off to me. So educate yourself and your family, pull up with I don't know. Yeah, you know what I mean.
And you get to read like interesting stuff. Like The 13th is a wonderful movie, and you get to learn at the same time. And I, that is a great example of the privilege you get. As opposed to getting called racial slurs on a playground growing up.
Exactly. Just like you get to learn about this, like, and you need to opt out of like the privilege. I encourage people to opt out of the privilege of not having to confront the tough conversations because millions and millions of people live it every day. And it should be uncomfortable, but like it has to be for all of us to be part of the solution,
For sure. Yeah, that's the only way we're going to see change.
And with that, we'll take a quick break and we'll be back with some Football Asides chat. Welcome back to Sidelines Asides. This is a segment on the show where we do discuss some more lighthearted conversations and debrief and general nonsense. And after what the last half hour also is definitely much needed. So for today, Wes and I will be sharing our favorite memes of quarantine so far. And yeah, Wes, do you want to start us off? Describe this meme to me.
Sure. Kind of related to what we were talking about earlier. If you haven't been following, Ben and Jerry's has been very actively supporting the protests. The founders were actually arrested in New York City for protesting, and they've been super outspoken on social issues, particularly issues surrounding race. On 420, they had a post that was talking about mass incarceration because of the criminalization of marijuana and how it's been affecting Black communities. But anyways, back to the fun meme. There is a meme. It starts off. It's one of those ones where it's like a conversation, or you know what I mean. But
like a script, you know?
Like a script, exactly. So it's like, other companies, we stand in solidarity with our Black employees. Ben and Jerry's, and then it's a picture of Travis Scott holding the microphone stand over his head, screaming as there's flames behind him, which I just think is a magnificent meme.
Yeah, that is brilliant. When I saw that, I truly did cackle, because that is like, with all the like different responses from like companies about like the ongoing events, it's been like a spectrum from like just like the lukewarm, like you could really say that about potatoes, to Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's is very much
they're on the extreme end.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And so for my meme, it is a picture of a textbook that is truly all but one line or 1 inch of a textbook page is highlighted, and the caption is "History students in 2040 highlighting the important stuff in the chapter about 2020." The entire page is just highlighted, and and I just think it made me cackle, because I'm just like, maybe that chapter should just come pre-highlighted because you keep thinking it can get crazier this year, and then it does.
Remember when this year started and we thought us bombing Iran was the craziest thing that was going to happen?
Yeah. It just feels like so long ago. I feel like I've aged like truly. I feel like I've lived 15 years in this year.
Oh, yeah. It's so every other week it's something new. But we'll make it through, and hopefully these memes will keep us through too. I sent you another one. It's the Pixar. You know how before the Pixar movies there's the lamp that turns its head?
Yeah.
This one is just a dog with a cone around its head, and it looks, and it's the eye.
That's
It's been so silver lining. The internet is undefeated in 2020.
That is true. The internet like really still comes through in 2020. There's a lot of black holes in the internet, and I go from like my screen time this week, absurd. Like on Sunday when you get your like Apple screen time notification, it had gone up by 300% from the last week. And I'm usually pretty good about like my screen time, and I was just like, oh, that is not great. So the internet really, it's out here.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that is it for the show. Wes, thank you so much for joining me today, and
thank you for
raging a little bit, raging against the machine, talking about racism in sports, and generally trying to make this podcast a part of the ongoing conversation. And we always hope to talk more than just about sports, remembering that it's not just on the pitch. There's also human beings, and there's lives and events beyond that.
For sure.
All right. If you would like to follow us, we're on Instagram and we're on Twitter at football.asides. And yeah, we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.
Stay safe, everyone. Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, really do stay safe.
All right.
And they do matter.
All right, Chloe. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right.